What's up everyone, welcome back to Workshop Rebuild. In today's episode, I'll share with you guys everything that I got done on the John Deere 55, and I'll share with you guys the first start on this Yanmar diesel engine. On this table behind me here, I have a couple parts which I picked up at John Deere, and I also have a to-do list, so on the initial startup of this Yanmar diesel engine, I don't forget anything. Okay, so right here I have my to-do list. I added oil to the engine and to the injection pump. I'll share that with you guys in just a second. I tightened the injection pump nuts. There are exactly 3 nuts around the perimeter of the injection pump, and you also want to adjust it so the timing is right. And I'll share that with you guys in just a second as well. I also have the thermostat and coolant ready for this Yanmar diesel engine, and I have that right there, but I won't speak about that right now. I'll share with you guys the filters that I have. I have the hydraulic filter, which is AM102723. This will be installed later on in this video, so if you want to just see that, stick around until the end of the video. Over here, I also have the engine oil filter, and this is the one I chose. This fits perfectly, and I pre-filled it and added a little bit of oil on the O-ring and then just tightened it up. I'll share that with you guys later on, but over here I have the thermostat. I also have the coolant that I'll be using. I have a diesel concentrate of antifreeze, which I will be mixing with some distilled water. So I believe this Yanmar diesel engine has 4 liters of coolant capacity. I will be mixing 60% of the concentrate with 40% of the distilled water. That's specific for my area because in winter it will drop down to minus 30 degrees Celsius, which is very cold. It can even get colder, so I do not want this to freeze up in the tractor. If your area is a little bit warmer, you can get away with a 50-50 mix. I have a brand new thermostat. This happens to be the part number. The thermostat also opens at 71 degrees Celsius. It says right there on the top. There's also another thermostat that opens up at 81 degrees Celsius. So if you want your engine to be a little bit warmer during the winter time, you can grab the other one. This one will also come in handy, especially for summer operation like mowing or just using the loader in very hot temperatures. So down below, I also have the coolant hose adapter. This is flush. I also have the gasket, 2 bolts, and this gasket right here lies underneath the thermostat once it's installed. And this one actually came in the rebuild kit from Friday Parts, but it was a little bit too big. So what I did, I just cut out 5 millimeters of this gasket right here, and it will still fit. And it's actually not even a problem because there is, right here, if you can see, there's a little bit more material on this side. So what I will do is actually install that just like that, and I'll make sure the cut is just above this little bit of material right here, and I don't think that will be a problem. Right now I'm gonna mix up some of that coolant, bring it over here, drop some into the water pump. What that means is it'll go into the engine, and then I'll just add enough so I can still install the gasket, the thermostat, the adapter, and tighten up this hose to the adapter. Once everything is tight over here, I'll open up the filler cap and add the rest of the coolant into the radiator. This way I do not have to run the engine and wait for the thermostat to actually reach a certain temperature and then open up to circulate the coolant. Radiator cap is now open. Lesson learned, I did spill a little bit of coolant below. Luckily it landed in the tray. It's always good to have a tray down there just in case you're working on a tractor. Over here, the coolant level is about 1 inch below the surface of the gasket, so that's perfect. I can now clean this surface up, install that little gasket that goes around the perimeter, put the thermostat in, and then put the bigger gasket with the hose adapter, flip the hose around, and tighten up these 2 hose clamps. The coolant has been topped off and all the parts are tightened down. Now I'll share with you guys the other side of the engine and what I got done off camera. This right here is the right side of the engine. I have the oil filter down below. I will mark the hour number on the oil filter, so when I have to change that later on. I filled up the engine with oil, so I added oil through this oil filler cap right here. And then the other half I also filled up through the top, which is going into the cylinder head. You'll notice the oil level right now is actually just above full because this engine has not been turned over just yet. It's just above full. I hope you guys can see that. I did that because the engine does not have any oil in it. It's just all filled with assembly grease basically. So once I turn over the engine and oil gets into the cylinder and everywhere, it will actually go back down. I might even have to fill up a little bit more later on. Down below on the injection pump, I also did something. So this right here is the portion of the injection pump, but also behind the injection pump, from this seam back, we have the governor. That's exactly where our throttle linkage is hooked up to. So this right here is our throttle, and back there we have our fuel shutoff. On the top, you'll notice a hex bolt, and this also has a rubber washer underneath of it. I opened this up and I added oil into the governor. It's really important if this has been standing for a long time. You might just want to add a little bit of oil into the governor. That will drip down, and obviously it will go into the engine, but it will supply oil to the governor and to the injection pump before you start it up. That's very important because this assembly right here is not cheap. So if you want to save that, just add a little bit of oil right into here. Another thing I did off camera is I installed all 3 injectors. So we have 3 injectors right here. All the brackets have been mounted, and all of these nuts, so 2 nuts per injector or per bracket basically, have been tightened down to 5 Newton meters of torque, and you want to torque them down evenly. You don't want the bracket like crooked in any way. You just want to make sure that they are both on the same height. So 5 Newton meters of torque. And then I also installed all the return lines going back into the injection pump. Another thing I did is I tightened down the hard lines going from the injection pump to the injectors. So right here, they're going to be tight. And once I turn the key, it will be primed. So the injection pump will be primed through this fuel pump to the filter, through the filter to the injection pump. Once it comes to the injection pump, we will have to crank over the engine to create pressure going into the injectors. One thing I will need to do once the engine is spinning or turning over and trying to start, I will have to bleed all the lines to the injectors because there is air within the system and the air cannot be there, or else the injectors will not open up properly. And in that case, I will need to grab an 11/16 wrench just like this. This one will come in super handy, especially to tighten up these lines right here. On my system, these are always going to be tight, and the only ones I will open are the ones on the injectors themselves. So once I spin this over by hand, I will have to open them up just a shade, and then when I see fuel coming to them, I will just tighten them up snug. And hopefully once 2 are tight and then the 3rd one seems to be fine, the engine will probably start right up. There is one more important step I have to take before I turn over this engine, and that is to tighten down 3 nuts around the perimeter of the injection pump. And before I tighten them down, I need to have the right timing, and I'll share with you guys my settings. So we have 3 nuts around the perimeter of the injection pump. We have one right here, one is right back there, and then there's another one underneath which I can't even show you, but there's 3 around the perimeter which hold the injection pump to this mid plate of the engine. Now over here on this nut, or close to this side of the injection pump, you'll notice there's an arrow on the injection pump itself. On the plate, we also have timing marks. We have 5 bigger marks and 4 smaller marks in between. The service manual says the engine model 3TN75 should be adjusted to the 2nd top mark, and that is the bigger mark. On the 3TN78, it should actually be placed right here on the 3rd mark, which would actually be the middle mark of all 5. So right here, the arrow is set to the 2nd top. I have all nuts tightened down, and we'll see how the engine runs. Before I turn over this engine, I'm just going to double check everything. I'm going to check that there's oil within the system. I'm going to check that I have enough coolant. I want to check that I have even any diesel fuel in the fuel tank. I added that beforehand. So hopefully when I turn the key over in the on position, I will hear the fuel pump adding fuel into the injection pump. That's also very important to start over the engine. Another thing is I'm going to check the injectors once more, make sure everything is tight. I want to make sure that I have these injector hard lines opened up at the injectors so I can see fuel coming out very soon after I turn over the engine just a couple of times. Another thing is I want to make sure that the throttle is all the way down, which will be the idle position. You also want to make sure that the set screw on the governor is also turned down. So if it's turned up all the way on your initial startup, you will have a high revving engine that obviously might not be very good right after a rebuild. So you want to make sure you have an idle when it starts up. Another thing is you want to make sure that your battery ground, which is your negative, and your positive are hooked up properly, or else you won't even be able to turn over this engine. So with all that said, let's see if this engine will start up. I cranked over the engine a couple of times and I finally have fuel at the injectors. The hard lines are cracked open at the injectors, so I have a little bit of fuel that just squirted out, and I'll share that with you guys right here. It just started to come out of each hard line. Actually, the fuel is coming out right here on the top of the nut. You'll probably see it right here on this one. There's still a little bit of fuel right there. But the fuel just actually squirted out this way, and I had the camera over here. As you can see, there's a couple of spots of diesel fuel on the concrete right now, and that's from the injector. So kind of place the camera on the other side, and I hope you guys can see this because it might just start up very soon. My goal is to make sure that I have all the air bubbles coming out of the diesel fuel, and once I think it's good enough, I'm going to start over here and I'm going to tighten it up and then go to the next one, tighten it up, go to the next one and tighten it up. The engine will probably be running already, and once the engine is running, I'm going to have to make fine adjustments by opening each one at a time, and then it'll bog down a little bit, it'll still be running, but then I just want all the air bubbles to come out of each injector line. So right now I'm going to open the door because it is a little bit smoky in the shop. And I will share with you guys a couple details on the engine before I move on to the rear end of this tractor. So this engine ran for the first time. We have a little bit of diesel fuel all over the tractor because I was bleeding those hard lines. I will have to clean that up, but when I bring it outside, I will probably bleed them once more just to have a proper idle and a running and revving tractor. Now, since the engine is running and I know it sounds very good, I will go ahead and connect everything in this area. So the drive shaft is already in place on the rear end, and on the flywheel, I do not have anything yet. I have the drive shaft, which is right there, but there's another plate which connects the flywheel to the drive shaft, and it's actually over there on that table. So I'm gonna grab that and hook it up over here, and I'm gonna have to torque some of those bolts down, so you'll see me do that. And once everything is tight towards the engine, I can then go ahead and tighten up those two bolts on the drive shaft, which hook up to the spline of the rear end. So this happens to be the plate which will be mounted to the flywheel with 8 bolts around the perimeter. All 8 bolts will be torqued to 27 Newton meters of torque. Once that's tightened down, I have 6 more bolts. These are all the same. 3 of them do have washers, and I believe the washers go in between the drive shaft and the coupling. The coupling bolts, which are these 3 right here, will be tightened between the coupling and this plate. I'll take 3 bolts and torque all of them to 49 Newton meters. Once that's torqued down, I can take the next 3 bolts and torque those down to the coupling itself, also with 49 Newton meters of torque. Okay, so I mounted the coupling on the front and I also got the drive shaft towards the rear and tightened down. It wasn't very easy to share this with you guys because it is a very tight space. Over here on the engine, the plate has been tightened down to the flywheel, the coupling to the plate, and the drive shaft to the coupling. That's the sequence I tightened everything down to, and all the bolts are torqued down. And as you can see, I marked every bolt with a yellow mark so I know everything is tight. Now the drive shaft is also tight on the spline. We have 2 bolts with 2 lock nuts, and I just tightened these down with 2 wrenches, and everything is tight and ready to go. In the beginning of this video, I mentioned I'm going to replace the hydraulic filter in the rear end, so I'll do that right now. I'm going to remove the old one and install the brand new one. So with the brand new hydraulic filter installed, I can go ahead and add a whole bunch of hydraulic oil into the rear end. John Deere does call for a low vis high guard, and it also says that on the dipstick. So go ahead and add a whole bunch of hydraulic oil into the rear end until it reaches the full mark on the dipstick. Hydraulic oil to the rear end of this tractor off camera, but now I'll share with you guys one more time an overview around the engine, because there are a bunch of components and maybe you need a view of this engine the way it sits. I also added a couple components around the battery tray, so I have some things in place. I'll give you guys a close-up view on that. I will be installing the air filter on all the panels around this tractor off camera, and then I'll bring you guys back for an upcoming video once everything is together, and I hope I can introduce a brand new attachment to you guys. I'll give you guys a quick walk around on the engine and I'll point out some features. We have the intake manifold, which also houses our air heater. This will come in handy in the winter time. We have our dipstick right here. Down below we have the injection pump, and behind that the governor. We have our inline fuel filter. That's this right here. If you guys are not getting fuel to your engine, you might want to have a look at that and maybe replace it. Down below we have our oil filter. We have the fuel pump itself. Off to the right we have a filler cap. This is for oil, it says right on the cap, and we also have a filler cap on the valve cover. This right here is the valve cover, and we also have our breather tube, which goes all the way down in front of the timing gear cover and down and out. Right here we have a coolant hose, which is filled with coolant right now. The water pump is right here, and we also have our radiator towards the front. On the other side of the engine, we have a couple other components. We have the exhaust manifold, and we have our muffler. Up front, we also have an alternator and our starter down below. All the wires for the alternator go back to the panel, and all the wires go actually over the engine and out down up front to the fuel tank, which houses our fuel sender. Right in the middle of the screen, you will notice our battery tray is right down here. We also have a rubber mat. That's great for our battery. The battery tray consists of a piece of sheet metal which is bent upwards, and the battery won't fall out this way. Then the battery tray is bolted to our frame directly on this right here. On the bottom of the battery tray we have another plate which sits vertically, and then between these two plates we also have another plate which acts as a heat shield for the muffler, and it's bolted down to this plate and this plate. Now on the front of the battery tray, we also have this heat shield for our battery. This consists of a piece of sheet metal. I will have to add a heat resistant fabric or a heat resistant material on this surface, which is closer to the engine. I'm gonna source that online, cut it out myself, and then just glue it on this surface. And then over here, we have all our fuses. As you'll see with the stickers, we have two 10 amp fuses. We have a 25 amp and a 15. You want to make sure your fuses are good, or maybe something on your dash might not work properly. Over here, we have one more fuse, which is behind here. This happens to be 10 amp as well. I'm actually just not sure what this is for right now. All in all, everything looks very good. I do need a couple bolts here and there, which we're missing. That's not a big deal. We have our ground cable, which is our negative from our battery. It will come through this heat shield and it will come down, and I bolted it directly to this bracket, which is actually right on the engine. Now over here, we also have the positive wire, and the positive wire runs directly to the starter. I'll share that with you guys quickly. So the positive wire comes right down here, follows along all these other wires, and goes right into our starter terminal, which supplies 12 volts to the starter. So I think that's enough information on this John Deere 855, especially around the engine and the battery tray. I gave you guys a bunch of info in this video. If you guys enjoyed it, don't forget to hit that like button down below. Comment if you have any questions. I'll try and get back to you as soon as I can with a proper answer. I always find it really interesting when I can help you guys out, because there are numerous questions I receive every day on all of my videos, and I try and get back to you as soon as I can. With that said, don't forget to hit that subscribe button as well. I am going to work on this tractor a little bit more, but it's almost done. So if you guys are interested in some other attachments on this John Deere, I will have some attachment videos in the near future. So stick around and subscribe for upcoming videos.